Chapter 13 of Against Odds by Lawrence L. Lynch. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Lynne Thompson. Chapter 13. Face to Face with Delbras. "You have found Delbras?" I echoed. This was news indeed, and I waited eagerly for further information. "Yes, sir, I'm sure of it. I don't doubt it, and it was in Midway Plaisance." "Go on, Dave." "Well, it's a short story. I had been lounging around the big wheel for some time. That monster has a sort of fascination for me. It makes me feel like a small boy, unable to gape enough. I was looking at the people coming and going, and I almost forgot that it was noon, until I heard someone say close beside me, 'Almost noon, Jack. Let's get out of this.' That startled me. I had not thought it was so late, and I took a look at old Sol and started on. I was walking pretty brisk, and all at once I came up behind a couple that made me start. One of them was Greenback Bob, past doubt, and the other was, or so I first thought, an Arab, dressed in American trousers and a coat, and wearing a fez. But when I came closer and looked him well over, I was sure it was Delbras. There were all the points, everything, and I followed them, feeling as pleased as if I had them already in bracelets. And then, just as I was wondering where they were going, they brought up in a crowd before one of those Turkish theatres. The hustler was hustling in his last crowd before dinner, and when the two pushed their way to the ticket booth, I kept close behind them. Well, sir, they were close by the place, but they bought no tickets, that I'll swear. Nevertheless, before I could take in the situation, they were walking past the man at the entrance and into the show, and I made all haste to buy a ticket and follow them. Of course I felt sure that I was following, for I had seen them pass through the inner door, but when I got inside, and began to look around me, they were not there, neither of them. I looked through the audience, it was a very thin one, made my way down to the stage to look for the door by which they had escaped me, and I did some mental profanity that'll be forgiven me, I know, and then I gave it up and went outside to reconnoitre the old barrack. On one side its windows overlooked a lane open straight from the street, and there was a small door in the rear corner, while in the other a door that must have opened behind the scenes inside gave upon a sort of court-like quarters where a lot of fellows were lounging, and a few cooking at an open fire. I made this discovery through a crack in the high fence in the rear, and I prowled about until I assured myself that my gentlemen were not there. I suppose I had hung about that rear enclosure some 20 minutes, or perhaps more, when I suddenly bethought me of the other Turkish booth and the big bazaar, and I came around to take a final look at the front and then move on. When I reached the front, one of the dancing girls was posturing before the entrance, and a new voice was calling to the crowd to come and see and admire the only original, etc. And, sir, there upon the upper step, exhorting the public, was Delbras himself. "The clever rascal!" I exclaimed. "You may well say so. Well, sir, it did not take me long to do my thinking. It was almost noon, a quarter to 12 in fact, and I said to myself, this fellow is playing Turk, and he has turned showman. He has just relieved the other fellow, and will be likely to be here all the afternoon. I couldn't have stayed there if I would without being spotted, for the moment I got myself a little nearer to him he spied me, and began a pantomime of roping me in hand over fist with an imaginary cable. He would have known my face if I had tried to keep near enough to be safe in case of a sudden move, so I took the chance of keeping my appointment with you, getting up a different mug, and hurrying back." "And you expect to find him there?" "I hope to find him there. It would never have done to have stayed. He would have spotted me at once. The fellow is a long remove from a fool. Carl, what do you think of this deal? What, in your opinion, is their little game?" precisely the same that you and I will play in their places. What could a man ask better if he wants to dodge arrest or evade surveillance than such a chance as Midway affords him? All he needs is a pull with some of these Orientals, and they are here for the most part for the backsheesh. Besides, you remember, Delbras is said to have crossed at the time many of these fellows were coming over, and he had plenty of chance to make himself solid on the way, or even before they crossed the water. Who knows how much fine work he has done among these Turks, Syrians, Algerians, Egyptians, Japs, and so on?" "Jove, you were right enough! And then Delbras has just the face and figure to disguise well, as a Turk, for instance." Dave made a wry face. "Or as an Arab, and even Bob could manage to transform himself into a passable Algerian. Your discovery of this morning, Dave, simply means that, for this moment, in addition to the task of watching all the European faces in search of our men, we shall have the added perplexity of peering under the hoods, turbans, fezes, etc., of all Midway." Dave's face was very grave, and he was silent for some moments. "The very fact," he finally resumed, "of finding Delbras in a Turk's fez and playing the jay for one of their theatres shows that you're right, Carl. Well," getting up suddenly and catching his hat from off the floor, "we didn't exactly come here to play, and as for disguises, why, we've played at that game ourselves." We took a hasty and somewhat meagre lunch at the nearest stand, and prepared for an afternoon upon the Plaisance. But I saw clearly that some other way must be devised to entrap our quarry; that, given the open sesame of the temples and pagodas, the booths and pavilions, the villages, with their ins and outs, and our tricky and elusive trio, would have an advantage against which it would be difficult to contend. And in this I was right. We found Delbras, or the man we believed to be Delbras, still occupying the lecturer's place at the entrance to the theatre. He was disguised to the extent of a pair of black whiskers and some slightly smoked gold-rimmed nose-glasses, just as he had been in the morning. And he did not labour continuously. Instead, he exchanged often with a second person, who took up the strain of flowery superlatives at about every other half-hour, during which relief the disguised Delbras gave some portion of his time to the box-office and making of change, and the remainder to puffing innumerable cigarettes. But in spite of our combined vigilance, before the afternoon was over, and while the crowds were thickest and rapid movement impossible, the man escaped our vigilance. It did not surprise me. Those Midway throngs made veritable sanctuary for a fleeing criminal. But it made me more than ever determined to find some other and quicker way of getting our hands upon this gang. All that week we haunted Midway to little purpose. Once in the very centre of the big Turkish bazaar, where everything was sold, and which was extended from time to time out of all proportion to its original size, where too I had been arrested and ignominiously marched away, to be rescued by Dave Brainerd, I caught a glimpse of Delbras, this time in full Turkish costume, and minus the beard and smoked glasses. I followed him recklessly, thrusting aside those who obstructed my way with an impatient and ruthless hand, until I came to a spot, almost at the southern exit of the long and narrow L, where a crowd was packed from side to side of the 8-foot aisle, with mouths agape, listening to the exhortations of a boyish-looking fellow wearing a Turkish fez and a sort of smoking-jacket, and looking, in spite of this, far more like a Jew than a follower of Mahomet. He stood at one side, close to the entrance, and a curtain framed and partially concealed him. Behind him, towering above him by a head and shoulders, was a tall Sudânese, his face black and shining and round, and his white robe and turban emphasizing the arm, bare, black, and massive, that waved a continuous accompaniment to the words half spoken, half shouted by the other. "Buy your tickets, now, now, now! Come and see how to get married. Come and see how to get divorced. Come and see how the ladies quarrel with their husbands. Come and see how the ladies quarrel with each other. Buy your tickets now, now, now." In this singular combination of the modern fakir plying his trade, and the huge black steadily and systematically beckoning toward a stairway partially concealed beyond the curtain, and looking like some giant eunuch of ancient romance, there seemed something which caught and held the public eye and the public wonder, and they crowded about the improvised entrance, and formed an impassable wall between me and the man so short a distance ahead, yet so utterly out of reach. It was vain to struggle. That Turkish fez had been to Delbras an open sesame through the packed mass of humanity, and for a time I saw it nodding above the lesser head halfway between the door of exit and that half concealing curtain. Then, presto, it was gone, and though I went wildly around to the farther entrance, pushing and jostling to right and left, and bringing down upon myself anathemas without number, though I reached the south end of the building in a moment, seemingly, and gazed in every direction, Delbras had vanished. It was while making this wild rush that I brought upon myself the attention of one of the very guards who had led me ignominiously away from the presence of Smug and the Camps. He had seen my hasty rush from the building, and, without at first recognising me, had followed me to inquire the cause of my haste. I knew him at the first moment, and when I had answered his inquiry, he knew me. "The matter? Oh, I was trying to overtake a person whom I particularly wished to see," I replied, and I saw on his countenance the dawning look of recognition. "Seems to me you and I have met before. You don't want to arrest me again, do you?" I added testily, and then I pulled myself together and asked more amiably, "Did you think I was running away with another wallet?" The young fellow's face brightened. Dave's words had told him and his companions who I was, and he answered very respectfully, "No, sir, not this time, though I had not recognised you at first. Can I help you in any way, sir?" "No, I'm afraid there is no help for me this time. By the way, did you happen to see any of those parties again after you marched me off so cruelly?" He knitted his brows to assist his memory, and finally replied, "Come to think, sir, I did see one of them, at least one of the persons who had been swindled, like yourself." "Swindled?" "Yes, sir. You see, we didn't quite catch on at the time, it was all done so quick, and I got the idea that it was a sort of pocket game, but it happened that I met the other gentleman the next day, if I remember, and I spoke to him, for I knew his face at once." "Describe him." "Why, not very tall, and well, not very light nor very dark, I should say. Not much hair on his face, and dressed in a sort of grey suit." "Yes, I see." I recognised the description as that of Smug, and determined to hear more. "And what did he say?" "Why, nothing at first, but when I saw him looking at me sort of sharp, I just stepped up and asked him how the row finished after the other guard and I had hustled you off, and then I told him how we had found out our mistake, and how your friend had let us off easy, although both were on the detective force, and then he explained how, as you and he were trying to keep the old man and his wife from being fleeced, one of the gang had set up the cry of 'Pickpocket,' and had pointed at you, and then, you know, when we fished that wallet out of your pocket, it looked "Yes," I replied gravely, "it certainly did." "He said," went on the guard, "that he had tried to make us understand that it was all a mistake about you, you know, but we didn't hear him." "So you told him that my friend and I were upon the SS?" I said. "Why, yes, was that never mind. What did he say about the others, the tall man with the fez, for instance? He had a notebook and some bills in his hand, you may remember." "Yes, sir, I do. Yes, he told me about him, Jumbo. But didn't you all get into a muddle? He had a narrow escape too, the tall man, you know. Did you know who he was?" I shook my head. "Well, sir, he came very near being fleeced too. He wanted to change a bill, it seems, and the old farmer and the other fellow, the one that told me, you know, had both been getting some change from a man that claimed to make a business of changing foreign papers and large bills, to accommodate people." "Oh!" I ejaculated. "Yes, sir, and this gentleman, he was a big man, you know, one of them foreign managers, and couldn't speak very good English. He was just going to change with them 100, I think he said, when somebody sets up the cry of pickpocket, you know." "Yes, I know. Go on." "Well, sir, after you was gone, of course in the crowd the real pickpocket got off scot free. It turned out that the farmer and him that told me had been done by some sharper, and that they was just ready to pass off on this foreigner a lot of counterfeit money." "Great Caesar!" I ejaculated, and then checked my hasty speech. After all, why should I expend my breath or wrath upon this guileless guard, who, after all, was doing me a service? And how cleverly Smug had twisted the story, and made it serve his turn! But it must not be repeated, if it had not been already. "Look here," I said, in a more amiable tone, "have you told this affair, all or any of it, to any one?" "Who, me? No, haven't had the chance. The fellow that was with me that day was taken off next day, and I've not seen a soul I know since. I did want to tell him." "It is well you did not. Look here, if you want to keep out of trouble, you must keep perfectly dark about this matter. It's being sifted on the quiet, and they'd take it very ill at headquarters if one of the guards was to leak on them, and maybe spoil their game. And if you should chance to meet this party again, remember, mum's the word." "I'll keep mum, sir. I don't want to lose my job, not yet, before I've seen half the fair." "Very good. Now, how long have you been on duty about this place?" "2 weeks, sir, ever since I was put on the force." "And this foreigner, manager, as you call him, did you have a good look at him?" "Oh yes, sir." "Ever seen him before?" "Now that you ask, I'm quite sure I have, but not knowing who he was. Yes, I'm sure I've seen him about the village among the Turks more than once." "Describe him." "Why, he's good looking, and tall, and dark, got a sort of proud gait, and square shoulders, always dresses well." "Thank you." I had squeezed my orange dry, and was anxious to leave him. I had suspected it before, and was now convinced that unwittingly, in my attempt to play the guardian angel to Adam Camp and his wife, I had come face to face with Delbras. When I compared notes with Dave that night, he was quite of my opinion. Chapter 14